Hello and welcome. Hi. Hi, so this is the fourth webinar in our series. And today we're going to be talking about vaccine hesitancy, the current issues that we're facing, the effect COVID has on everything, and techniques that you as CoMO members can use to tackle it. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sam Nye. I'm the Executive Director of CoMO, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. Today's webinar is going to be translated into French and Spanish live. So if that's something that you would like to tap into, we're just putting the full instructions on how to switch on the interpretation function in the chat box now. And if you have any difficulties getting it set up, please just drop a note in the chat box or email Nadia, give her a wave and she will give you a hand. We're going to be hearing from Gary Finnegan, who is editor of Vaccines Today, which is an online platform for discussing vaccines and vaccination, and also Dr. Jessica Kaufman, a research fellow in the Vaccine Acceptance, Uptake and Policy Research team at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. They're going to give us an insight into the root causes of vaccine hesitancy, the infodemic, and what one of those is we're currently experiencing, and what we as patient organisations can do about it. At the end of their presentations, we're going to have time for a Q&A, so please put any questions you have for our speakers in the chat box, which is should be on the right-hand side of your screen. If we don't get a chance to address your question, then we'll circulate answers after the webinar. We're also going to make the presenter slides and a recording available afterwards, so don't worry if you miss something. Please make sure that if you're not speaking, then you have yourself on mute, just to make sure that we can hear everyone nice and clearly. And if for any reason you have any technical problems, just email Nadia on the email that she's just about to put into the chat box now, or you can of course send her a chat through the Zoom platform. So, oh, there we go. I'm just zooming through my slides now. I'm now going to hand over to Jess to get us started.
Thanks very much, Sam. And thanks everyone for coming along today and for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. So let's just see if third time's the charm, if I can make it work after testing it. And how do people feel about that? Can you see? Excellent. Getting there. Only a year into it, you'd think we'd be pros. So yes, thank you again for having me, Sam. My name is Jess Kaufman, and as Sam said, I'm a research fellow at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute. I am originally American, but I've been living in Australia, where the Murdoch Children's Research Institute is, for the last 10 years. So I apologize for my sort of unplaceable accent. Our research at MCRI is really focused on vaccine uptake and acceptance in lots of different populations. So we work on coming up with strategies to support midwives and general practitioners to talk about vaccines with hesitant parents or expectant parents. And then we've also been doing a lot of work in the last year, as I think a lot of people have, with COVID vaccines and the impacts, the psychosocial impacts of COVID on kids and families. So today I'm going to talk mostly about vaccine hesitancy and research around vaccination that's mostly relevant or comes from routine vaccination. So there are a lot of parallels with COVID vaccines, and a lot of it's going to be relevant for that, but there are some key differences. And I think I'm going to throw to Gary after this presentation for a little bit more information around some of the differences between COVID vaccines and the world we're living in today. Vaccine hesitancy, I'm sure everyone is really familiar with that term now, but even sort of 5 years ago, this wasn't a hot topic really. It wasn't something that lots of people knew about, and it wasn't something lots of people were focused on and discussing. And it's definitely increased in the media and awareness of vaccine hesitancy since COVID, but actually even kind of earlier than that, it was gaining a lot of traction. So The WHO named vaccine hesitancy a threat to global health in 2019. That was around when we were seeing all these outbreaks of measles around the world. And so it's certainly become a focus of a lot more research and interest. Vaccine hesitancy is definitely a problem, but it's really a problem when it becomes vaccine refusal. So people can have lots of questions, they can exist on a whole spectrum of beliefs about vaccination, but it's when lots of people start to refuse vaccines and those rates go down that we start to see the outbreaks of disease. It's useful to think about vaccine hesitancy as a spectrum like this, and thinking that, you know, lots of people have some questions about vaccination, or they have some concerns about vaccination, and that's very normal. And the vast majority of people who have questions, even lots of questions, or feel, you know, have a lot of uncertainty about vaccinating, actually do go on to vaccinate fully. You know, this is specifically relevant with childhood vaccines, but it's generally the same principles hold with adult vaccination too. The proportions are a little different though. So a small number of people are what we would consider very highly hesitant. And these are people who might say, get some of the vaccines on the schedule, but not all of them, or they might come up with their own delayed schedule of vaccinating instead of following the official recommended schedule. And a very small portion of people don't vaccinate at all, or they once vaccinated and now they don't vaccinate. And I think it's good to distinguish between people who don't vaccinate and what we would call anti-vaccine activists. And those people are a very, very, very small number of people globally. They just have a really big voice sometimes. The main reasons that people have any kind of hesitancy, whether it's a lot or a little, about vaccines are always sort of the same. It's generally concerns about vaccine safety, concerns about the effectiveness, whether they actually work, and concerns about necessity. So whether the disease is enough of a threat for them to think that the vaccine is necessary. And in research and in public health, and even in just general communication about vaccination, we pretty much try to focus on people who are hesitant all the way up to highly hesitant. We don't have as much, we don't want to spend as much of our effort and our focus and our attention on the anti-vaccine activists, because you don't usually get very far with them and it can spend a lot of your energy. This is actually a more accurate depiction, I think, if you think about the population and the number of people in these groups. This is kind of more what it looks like. Many, many, many more people globally accept vaccines, pretty much without too much hesitancy. Very, very small number who are more highly hesitant. So even though most people are not really very highly hesitant about vaccination, that can change kind of at any time, because it's that spectrum. Depends what people are looking at, what they're reading, what they're hearing, what's happening around the world. All of that can move people up and down on that vaccine hesitancy spectrum. And one thing that can really influence people is lots of misinformation or anti-vaccine messaging. And unfortunately, there have been studies that show that this kind of messaging actually moves faster and it reaches more people than the truth. So it can be quite hard to combat this kind of thing. And this is something that we're definitely experiencing now with COVID. And it's having a real effect. There's lots of polls now. Obviously, vaccines are rolling out around the world. Australia's program is meant to start on Monday. So we're a little bit behind, but there's lots of polls about whether people are going to get it or not. And I think that some of the messaging around this, the anti-vaccine messaging can have a real effect and a measurable effect on how people feel about vaccination. But like I said, COVID vaccines, pretty different than routine vaccines. COVID vaccines are much newer. They're targeting adults. There are a range of reasons that it's not so unexpected, I think, that we would have concerns and questions about COVID vaccines. So with regular routine vaccination, we have hesitancy. We know we have different levels of hesitancy. We want, generally speaking, from a public health perspective, we want uptake. We want very high levels of acceptance and uptake. But the question is sort of, how do we get there? And I would say, and I might be biased because I have a background in communication research, but I think it's all about communication. And it's certainly true that communication is one of the best strategies we have. It's involved in pretty much every strategy that we have to increase vaccine acceptance and vaccine uptake around the world. And communication includes lots of things. It's not just having a conversation with someone. It's all the different types of media. It's what you see, it's what you read, it's what you hear. So there's, it really pervades everything that we talk about when we're talking about strategies to increase uptake. So I'm going to talk about a few types of communication that I think will be most relevant to you in your roles in patient organizations. So I don't know how many of you, or if any of you, are healthcare providers, but communication with healthcare providers is one of the most important types of communication in terms of increasing vaccine uptake and ensuring that people have confidence in vaccines. So we know that if a trusted healthcare provider that you already have a relationship with recommends that you vaccinate, that is a huge driver of vaccine uptake. It's one of the main reasons that people get vaccinated, or one of the main reasons they point to. So we know that having a really good communication encounter with your healthcare provider can, it's respectful, it can motivate you to vaccinate if you're hesitant, even if you don't vaccinate at a given appointment. If you have a really good relationship and good communication with that healthcare provider, you'll go back to them, you'll have you'll continue to see them, and they have more opportunities to talk to you about it. So we say that even if you don't convince someone, having respectful and open communication is really, really important. And of course, the opposite of that is if you have a really poor communication encounter with a healthcare provider, it can turn you right off vaccinating altogether. So if you are a healthcare provider and you want to learn a little bit more about some skills for talking to parents who are hesitant about vaccinating their children, I suggest that you have a look at this training module. This is sharing knowledge about immunization. It's a whole suite of resources that was developed here in Australia by a great researcher called Julie Leask. And I'll talk about some of the resources that are just available to the public in a minute. But if you're a healthcare provider, you can log in here and you can actually do an online module that walks you through having a conversation with different people. And the key principles of this are really how to identify how hesitant someone is when you start talking to them, and then kind of tailoring the communication approach that you take with that person based on those cues that they're giving you. So that's what that kind of complicated graphic is about. And then a related site, which I was directly involved in developing, and this one may not be as relevant for you, but this is similarly training for healthcare providers who talk to expectant parents about maternal vaccines in pregnancy, and also about the birth hepatitis B vaccine and other early childhood vaccines. So with this one, you don't have to be a healthcare provider. You can create a login and say you are if you want to do this training. But again, it has modules that sort of walk you through having difficult conversations, and then some quizzes and things like that. This, though, communication with friends and family is probably something that everyone has experienced or may experience when you're talking about vaccination, particularly if you're someone who is really passionate about vaccination. And these are just some pieces that have come out in the media here that I've commented in. But really the key principles here, and they're not rocket science, but it can be hard to actually implement them. The keys are really, if you have a family member or a friend who you know is hesitant, first of all, decide if you even want to go here. You don't have to be the person that convinces them to vaccinate. That can really break a relationship if you become sort of adversarial about it. But if they've come to you and you want to have a conversation, ask them what they're concerned about, and then you have to really listen to what they say and acknowledge that those concerns are real to them, and maybe, that they're legitimate, that they come from a place of concern about their child. And then if you have some information that you can share, or some links, or some sources of information, you can share that. But it doesn't really work to aggressively try and rebut every myth that they say. It just kind of makes people get defensive and they don't take in anything that you're saying. One thing that we know is really helpful is sharing personal stories. So this could be a story about getting the vaccine for you, but it could also be a story about how you came to the decision to vaccinate. Maybe you had some questions. What convinced you? Talk to them, as your real self, and tell that story. And that can be really powerful in changing someone's mind. And ultimately, just don't pass judgment. As we know with the healthcare providers, if you leave the door open Someone's more likely to come back and talk to you again, and you're more likely to get there by inches than if they feel like you are judging them and they never want to talk to you about it again. Now, communication online is where I'm going to spend the most time, because I think that this is probably where you may have the most experience, or this may come up the most for you if you run patient organizations with Facebook presences or online presence in general. So I'm just going to walk through a couple different strategies here, or a couple different things that I think might be useful for you to know. So the first one is, it's important to empower people to actually recognize misinformation in advance, before they see it. You can also, and I'll go into these in more depth in a second, you can also counter misinformation. You don't have to. It's not your job that you have to do this task, but if you decide to, you can make a difference by countering some of that. You can share clear and evidence-based resources. This is always really helpful. You can also do something that we call unmasking the techniques that are actually used to spread misinformation. So that takes a lot of the power out of the message if you basically can show the people listening to someone spreading misinformation, if you can show them the technique that is being used, how they're being sort of tricked, that can take a lot of the sting out of that misinformation. Again, using storytelling on a bigger scale to a lot of people online, really helpful and really powerful. And finally, you can partner with the pro-vaccine community. So that's individual people and organizations. So I'm just going to go into these in a little bit more detail. So right here, I just want to shout out to Gary's excellent co-authored UNICEF booklet here. So the Vaccine Misinformation Management Field Guide, super interesting, really useful resources, all about how to tackle misinformation in the wild, I guess, when you see it. One thing I really like out of this book, a really cool topic, I think, is the idea of pre-bunking. So that's when you actually prepare people for the misinformation or the misleading tactics that they're going to see, and it helps prepare them like a vaccine, so that they're not as affected by it when they do see it. So that's sort of telling them the true fact, telling them what the misinformation that might be coming, and why it's wrong, and then repeating that fact to them. So there's a lot more information about that in this field management guide. If you decide to counter misinformation, well, like I said, first of all, decide if you want to counter it. You can block people, or you can moderate comments in your Facebook thread. It's good to be transparent about that. People find it, I think, more antagonistic if you just start deleting comments. But if you say, look, we're moderating comments on this page, we're keeping it on topic, or something like that, that can be a totally valid choice. But if you see misinformation spreading and you think it's harmful, you think it might be catching hold, you have an option to counter it. And what you should really think about when you do that is the silent audience of people who are watching. So not the person that you're talking to directly necessarily, but the hundreds or thousands of people on your Facebook page who are looking on silently. So if you decide to counter someone posting misinformation, a brief, clear explanation works the best, not something really long, not something really emotional. Explain why what they've said is incorrect, and provide an alternative explanation. So that's where, when you say, somebody says that the flu vaccine made them have the flu, you can say, the flu vaccine can't cause the flu. It's an inactivated vaccine. It's not possible. However, if you felt sick, it might have been because your body was mounting an immune response. So it's filling that gap left by the countering of that fact, that misinformation. Sharing clear evidence-based resources, very helpful. I'm just plugging these ones again because they're ones that I've been involved with and I know that they're really good. So the Sky resources are fact sheets that they're really well designed. They deal with some of the main concerns people have with the routine childhood vaccines. There's also fact sheets on Mum-Bub-Vax, which are about, as I said, flu, pertussis, and hepatitis B. And at the end, I have a list of lots more resources that you can save and use and have on hand when you do find somebody spreading misinformation. So this is the unmasking the techniques thing that I was talking about. This comes from a WHO guidance book, which is also linked here, which is about how to respond to vocal vaccine deniers in public. And the key here is, again, thinking about the silent audience, all those people who are watching and not saying anything, but they're being influenced by what you do and what this other person does. So the first step is to avoid hostile interactions. I don't think anyone wants to be sucked into some angry debate with an anti-vaccine activist. But then what you want to do is, if they're coming at you, you want to identify that technique that they're using. And so these are the techniques that the WHO has identified. They could be, citing conspiracy theory type things. So, the government is systematically hiding information. If you point that out, it just takes out some of that power. They could use fake experts, which is where you find some of these, anti-vaccine documentaries and things. They find someone with a doctoral degree and they roll them out. So if you can point out why that person is not really an expert in this area, that can be helpful. Selectivity is when somebody takes one paper, Andrew Wakefield's paper about MMR vaccine, for instance, and says, this paper says they're bad, so they must be bad. And they just ignore the thousands and thousands of other papers that don't say that. Impossible expectations, that's when someone says, I wouldn't get a vaccine because no one can guarantee that it's 100% safe. And we can't guarantee that it's 100% safe, and we shouldn't be claiming that we can. But if you point out that nothing is 100% safe and nothing, no health measures are ever 100% safe, that can kind of reduce the power of that as well. And finally, misrepresentation and false logic is when people sort of jump to fake conclusions, something like vaccines are unnatural, humans are natural creatures, we shouldn't put unnatural things in our bodies. So these can be tricky to use in practice, but this book has a whole workbook kind of example of how to use these techniques. So you can have a read of this if you're really interested in getting involved, but it is pretty hard to do live when you're talking to someone. So it's a little easier online. Using storytelling, this may be something that you already do if you're a patient organization. It has a huge amount of impact if you can relate to people and you can share your own story. The examples here are the Light for Riley campaign was started in Perth in WA in Australia when a family lost their son to whooping cough. And they founded an organization and they've become enormously effective patient advocates for vaccination. The I Immunize campaign is more of a campaign strategy, but again, these are real people. They happen to be in Perth as well. And they were from the community, and they would these ads came out and they would say, I'm a, well, it says here, I use cloth nappies, I eat whole foods, and I immunize. So it was about relating to the community that they were trying to communicate with. And then, of course, there's videos and stories of people who either didn't have access to a vaccine or did, and how that affected them. And finally, partnering with the pro-vaccine community. This is really helpful. Pro-vaccine individual people on your page can sometimes counter misinformation for you. They can be advocates for vaccination within your membership. And you can also have reputable organizations who can amplify your messaging, or who you can call in if, in the very unlikely but unpleasant event you get sort of bombarded by anti-vaccine activists, you can actually call on an organization called Shots Heard Around the World. And this very nice man, Todd, who was interviewed by Gary in this video, will come and, well, they'll offer you support, and they can help actually fight back against when sort of a coordinated attack happens to an organization. So that's really the key tips. So in summary, communication is one of the best tools that we've got to reduce vaccine hesitancy, and communication in all forms. So healthcare communication, healthcare provider communication is a hugely impactful way to increase uptake. And so advocating for healthcare providers to recommend vaccines confidently to their patients is a really good way to increase uptake. If you're talking to family or friends and you feel comfortable having this kind of conversation with someone who's a bit hesitant, then you just have to remember to be really open and respectful when they're telling you what they're concerned about, and try and share your own story, particularly about how you decided to vaccinate. And when you're communicating online, if you're running an organization that deals with vaccine hesitancy or questions, or even anti-vaccine activists, the keys here are to help people recognize misinformation before they see it, to counter misinformation with evidence and useful resources, evidence-based resources, to unmask misinformation techniques that people are using if you are able to, Again, to tell stories, to share stories from your members, and to build partnerships with not with anti-vaccine activists, build partnerships with pro-vaccine organizations and individuals. And so these are just a list of resources. I think, as Sam said, she's going to share these slides with you afterwards, so you don't have to note all these down, but have a look through some of these, find some of your favorite, FAQ sheets or information sheets, and keep them in your back pocket, so when someone comes to you with something that you have trouble answering, you know immediately where to send them or where to look to get that answer yourself. And that's my presentation. And please, if you have questions or if you'd like to know more, I put my email address and my Twitter on there. I'd love to answer and to stay in touch. Thanks. I think I can stop sharing. How does that work? Here we go. Over to Gary now.
Great, thanks Jess, thanks so much. My slides up here and go. Okay, that look okay? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a million, Jess, and thanks everyone and to CoMO for inviting me here today. So I'm also going to talk a lot about communication, mostly online, vaccine communication online, in the context of this infodemic that we're living through, and I'll mention that again properly in a moment. So the infodemic, just briefly maybe, is this kind of spread of misinformation that moves very quickly around the world, and I think that was well covered by Jess there. So in parallel with the viruses that are moving around, coronavirus currently getting most of the attention, there's also the spread of misinformation. So I'll show you some of the examples and experience we've had at Vaccines Today, especially over the last 12 months. And then look at some of the ways that international agencies and NGOs and others are responding to this crisis. And then finally, hopefully share some useful tips that you can use yourselves. So I won't just talk about COVID, but it's impossible to ignore. And it is changing things in some useful ways and some challenging ways. So it's making the online conversation more polarized and more antagonistic, catalyzing the spread of misinformation. But it is also inspiring people to take this even more seriously. Definitely the last few years, there has been a lot more work on vaccine acceptance and communication, and some of that is being put into practice, and other people are coming and taking an interest because everyone has a stake in making these vaccine programs work. And also now that people are knowing more and asking more, thinking more about how vaccines work, how herd immunity works and so on, and there are opportunities to communicate about vaccines, including to people of all ages. So when you think about adolescents or college students who might be target for meningitis vaccines, they will soon be asked to have, well, in some countries soon enough, offered COVID vaccines. So this is something they've never thought about before. So how they process that invitation could affect how they accept or don't accept meningitis vaccines. When it comes to communication online, I'll talk about some of the concerns I know people have, because we had the same worries, and some of them were justified, but mostly it's not as terrifying as we think. So our sort of take home will be to just do it. And to engage with, with other networks and organizations, use material that already exists in some of the resources that we're sharing today, and then identify any gaps. If there's something that isn't there, that no one has made a video explaining a certain type of meningitis B vaccine or whatever it might be, ask how you can fill this gap. It's existed in some form, at least as long as vaccines have been around. This is a cartoon when they were introducing smallpox vaccines, and you can see some people are turning into cows, and it's the idea that vaccines are unnatural. So some of these themes have always been there, that it's unnatural, unnecessary, or that there are conspiracies behind it. Of course, it's sort of anti-vaccination messaging on steroids now, because we have social media channels that move so quickly. Just to show how seriously this is being taken globally, this is a quote from the WHO Director General saying that it's from around July last year. We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're also fighting an infodemic. And this obviously moves very, very quickly and could affect uptake of vaccines. So in general, we're online all the time, looking at these things, and definitely seeing an increase in traffic, increasing interest in vaccine-related topics. I think some of the conversations have gotten a lot more antagonistic. The vocal minority is certainly active and has kind of merged with these other conspiracy theories on 5G mobile phone networks or various other sort of global elite conspiracies. And this does complicate things quite a bit. And then you've got anti-mask protesters or libertarian groups who have taken on vaccines as one of their issues. So this is potentially quite worrying. But again, they are quite a small minority. Very briefly, when you're reading something online or listening to someone speaking to you about vaccines, all your pre-existing beliefs and attitudes shape how you hear this and how you process this. So we have to consider that not everyone listens in the same way. Sometimes people ask us why misinformation is so appealing. Sometimes it feels more appealing than science-based information. And sort of the summary of why this might be is that simple explanations feel true. They're easier to process, and they are repeated a lot. So this also reinforces their truthiness. And at a time of uncertainty, which is how we're living right now, conspiracy theories tend to do very well. And it's not just now in a crisis around coronavirus, but when you're invited to have a vaccine or to give your child a vaccine, there is often some uncertainty about, well, what's this disease anyway? What's the vaccine? What do we know about it? So people are living with this sort of uncertainty all the time. And in some cases, anti-vaccine ideas appeal to someone's pre-existing views about, especially about natural living or freedom or whatever their pre-existing ideas are. Anything that's familiar is more likely to feel true. So this is where repetition comes in. And generally, no one likes to be wrong, So once people get into the idea of feeling like this is what their community believes in, it can be quite difficult to change people's minds. I think Jess explained there why myth busting can backfire if it's not done very carefully. So if you're just insisting that flu vaccines don't cause the flu or that MMR vaccines are safe, you really need to replace this with an alternative, or else people are left with a vacuum. Or in some cases, they didn't think there was a problem with flu vaccine, but now you've given them this idea that maybe there is. So you have to handle this very carefully and make sure that the explanations you're giving appeal to what people already know or what they believe. So this, I think you all know already, social media is making things more challenging. It's making it faster. But it also gives us an opportunities to connect with each other. We've been online at Vaccines Today for 10 years and on Twitter for 10 years, Facebook for about 7 or 8. And at the very beginning, I think there were probably more anti-vaccine activists than pro-vaccine voices, but that's really changing a lot. And meningitis organizations and other patient groups, older people's advocacy groups, these are all there, and now much more than in the past, doctors and nurses are there. I think there was a lot of reluctance for health professionals to go online a few years ago, but more people have done it and realized it's quite worthwhile doing. And hopefully NGOs and patient groups will also continue to join. One of the problems we have is that we tend to talk to each other. So this is a graph. So this is a complicated looking map, but the red at the bottom are the anti-vaccine pages, and the ones at the top in blue and purple are pro-vaccine. But more or less you can see that the red moves a little beyond its own circle, its own sphere of influence. And so anti-vaccine groups, we believe, are a bit better at reaching those who are undecided or who have questions. And it's really important that people who have fair questions, that they go online looking for answers, that they find evidence-based answers or science-based answers. And that's what Vaccines Today is supposed to do. We've been trying to do this for just over 10 years with varying degrees of success. I think we've made all the mistakes along the way. So hopefully I can give you some of the experience of what we've learned and about what works. So it was launched in 2011, and we have an editorial board that governs what we're doing, and we're in various networks like the WHO's Health on the Net, or WHO Vaccine Safety Net network, and the Health on the Net network of health websites. We also work in a lot of coalitions and groups like these that already have resources like videos, infographics, frequently asked questions. So here you can join these groups, or you can just go and take a look at the material they have in their resource libraries, and you can use them. And these organizations are all very happy to share this stuff. So as I said at the start, our advice is kind of just do it. You know, you got to be present, or else anti-vaccine voices will fill that vacuum. So go to the social networks where your audience is. The different social networks have slightly different demographics. I guess Facebook is very useful, we find, for reaching some parents. And then in terms of the tone, I think you're really well placed as meningitis groups to communicate with passion and authenticity, to tell stories. And these are the things that we've found work well. You know, there are different approaches, but the two big things that work for us is storytelling, including, you know, parents talking about why they became activists. Maybe their child was sick and recovered, or maybe you know, in some cases died. Our most popular article is actually a parent in Germany whose son developed a complication of measles, and his article really went viral and is still probably the most read article we have, even though it's about 5 years old. And the other thing that works well is short videos or cartoons that answer a question people have, like what is herd immunity, or how do vaccines work? How do clinical trials work? So I think if you can create resources like that, you have a good chance of succeeding. And I'm looking at some of the things that CoMO and some of the members do. I think you already learned the lesson about telling stories like this pretty well. So we have lots of partners that we work with. I won't dwell on those, but just to show you that it's quite diverse. But moving on to COVID. So this time last year was just the beginning. We didn't even have a pandemic declared yet. But we saw a big increase around March, April. It reduced and it has gone up again now that vaccines are being rolled out. But interest in this has increased, and people are staying longer on our website. So they're staying for about 3.5 minutes, which is quite a long time. You know, there was a survey of vaccine websites around the world. People are staying about 2 minutes. Sometimes they come and get what they need and leave, so it's not a bad thing if they only stay for 2 minutes. But we tend to keep people a bit longer by using videos and using other techniques, like pointing them to other relevant resources. So if someone comes looking to find out about clinical trials, maybe they'll go and find out about vaccine safety, or they'll go and find out about herd immunity or something else. Some of the topics that have been highly engaging on social media for us include anything about coronavirus this year. We had one about the flu pandemic from 1918 that went kind of viral for a second time. And then our most popular one lately has been about how vaccines are developed, because there was a lot of interest in the trials. We've also developed some new things that we think filled gaps about how coronavirus spreads and how social distancing works, and then how vaccination works to reduce the spread of infection. So these are quite simple. They're not even very expensive in a lot of cases. We're also, I suppose, trying to contain expectations a little bit, because we're a bit worried that, by the summertime, people will think this is over. Health professionals are vaccinated in most countries, maybe by then. So of course, we may still need to have some restrictions. So not to make people expect, that vaccines will save them from the pandemic immediately. So social media, maybe this is of interest to some of you who are already online or are thinking about it. This was the thing, we hesitated ourselves about going onto Twitter in particular, because it's people can be on Twitter anonymously and could be quite aggressive. So yes, it happens, we do get anti-vaccine people. It isn't as bad as we feared, and increasingly pro-vaccine voices are joining these conversations and they're defending vaccines. I think Jess put it really well, saying about this sort of silent audience. So this is who you have to think about. It's those fence sitters, as Julie Leask called them about 10 years ago. These are people who haven't decided, but they have questions and they've heard some things they're worried about. So you're really responding to them. And if someone wants to send anti-vaccine messages, we usually reply once with a fact, because we sort of have ready-made frequently asked questions. We can answer most of their concerns about vaccine ingredients or safety or whatever. And I think once you're seen to make a fair effort to reply, you seem like a normal person who's giving an answer, that's probably a good start for people who are undecided. It's the person who's on the other side who's angry and aggressive. I don't think that's a very effective way to communicate. So if someone asks you for evidence, we try to provide it, pointing them to reputable sources, try to be really clear and responsive. We try to be reasonably quick. This is a difficulty that we had at the beginning, that we would try to go off and think about our response and come back tomorrow, but then everyone's moved on. So unfortunately, you do have to prepare. And this is where frequently asked questions can be really useful, because you can just go and say, don't worry, there is an answer to this question. You're concerned about X. Well, so are other people, and here's the answer. Just to be respectful, I think to be empathetic is really important. There's no need for capital letters, even if people are screaming at you. And as Jess also said, trying to win an argument against someone who's strongly anti-vax is impossible. So your target audience is the other people who are watching, and that's, so it's really important to be just to be a decent person about it, if possible. So this is just an example. Maybe it's difficult to read on the screen, but regularly people arrive and answer questions on Facebook or Twitter for us. So someone raised a concern about flu or about vaccines, and others will arrive and offer a human explanation or answer the question without us even needing to do anything. And we published a short paper in Vaccine about this, but the conclusions were really storytelling and visual communication. Videos and infographics are really good at getting people and keeping people on your website. So on this section, the conclusion is that COVID has changed things quite a lot, and there is a risk that the conversation is more polarized, but there are big opportunities to engage with people who are thinking about vaccines for the first time, and to try and reach them and ensure that they have a positive view or a positive experience of vaccines. Okay, I will accelerate a little because I know there are questions. So just to briefly show you some of the big responses that are happening in the last 12 months to the misinformation pandemic. So WHO has been coming on and answering specific rumors that are going around, whether garlic is better for you than other medicines, for example. But there are more serious ones, obviously, particularly around the vaccines or about other COVID treatments. This infodemic terminology is becoming more common, and there are training courses in infodemic management. And these generally involve, monitoring social media channels to pick up signals of topics that are of concern and then developing responses. The vaccine safety net that I mentioned is very active in connecting people and other stakeholders like social media channels. Social media platforms themselves could always do more, but are doing a little better on closing anti-vaccine Facebook groups and showing warnings and trying to point people towards quality information. Thanks to Jess for mentioning this already. This is the guide that UNICEF published that I helped to write. But this pulls together some evidence on how to respond carefully, and then practical tips on following rumors so you can respond to emerging concerns and questions. One example, this is from the US. They are following the media and social media and are developing these dashboards. So here you can see that this is for, I think, New York, the topics that are coming up. But to give a practical example, which has totally slipped my mind. Oh yeah, for example, there was one going around about whether or not mRNA vaccines would change your DNA. This was a small thing at the beginning, and they already began preparing responses about what is mRNA, how does it work, it can't change your DNA. So when someone hears this, which they probably will eventually, this rumor about mRNA changing your DNA, they already know, no, there's something about that that's false. I'll go fast through this one, but there has been more work on analyzing what are the themes that people are using when they're talking about anti-vaccine ideas. So some of them are varying from liberty and freedom on one hand, and on the other side, conspiracies about economic motivation on behalf of governments or companies. You can see these slides afterwards. This is just a few tips that one of the universities working on that project developed with the UN. Use trusted messengers, I think, is very relevant for you. There are some games that have come up to show people the motivation of motivation of those who are developing conspiracy theories about all kinds of things. And it's quite a good one. It puts you in the shoes of a conspiracy theorist and helps you appreciate their motives. Other trainings include spotting the troll. You should play this one. I only got 6 out of 8, which was terrible. See if you can do better than 6 out of 8. So it shows you 8 profiles and you have to figure out whether they're real or not. And then it explains whether they are. Yeah, I mean, you know that COVID has disrupted vaccination a little. And as I've said, there are opportunities in future for communicating. So here are some existing resources and coalitions, maybe more interestingly. There are life course coalitions, adult vaccine coalitions that some of you may already be in. And the final thought is just to go for it. If you're not already doing it, give it a try, and it's not as scary as you think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. That was fascinating. And also thank you, Jess. Really interesting presentations. And I know you've answered some of the questions that I've had over the past year as well. So that was great. We're going to go straight into some questions now. So the first one I've got on here is from Chris. Are the stats, or is the spread of hesitancy the same in adults as in children? Jess, do you want to start us off with that one?
Sure. I assume you're talking about sort of vaccine uptake for adult vaccines versus childhood vaccines. Generally, we do see greater levels of hesitancy in adult vaccination, for adult vaccination. It's a little bit different. It's when people make decisions about and for themselves, they weigh up slightly different criteria, I guess, than when they're weighing them up for their children. There is less research around adult vaccination, but I think that's changing really rapidly. There's been a lot of interest in adult vaccination all of a sudden. So watch that space, I think.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add to that is that adults is quite a diverse group. So we're seeing it now with COVID, but we see it with flu as well, where older people perceive the risk more as a more real thing, whereas a 30-year-old, do they get their flu vaccine? Will they care about a COVID vaccine if cases are down. Yeah, so there's a lot of subgroups in adults.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Definitely.
Cool, thank you very much. So the next question we had in is from Christine. Is there a tendency that younger parents have higher levels of hesitancy towards vaccination than older parents, or is there no difference?
First-time parents have higher hesitancy than later than parents who already have children. I don't know if that's holds true of purely the age of the parents, but we've definitely seen repeated studies that have shown that the first-time parents have more questions and more concerns. Sorry, am I jumping on you, Gary? Is it
No,
right that I went?
Oh, I'm glad you did. I don't have anything to add to that one.
That's really interesting. As a kind of vaguely recent first-time parent, it does make sense. You would have a lot more questions, but yeah, really interesting that kind of transfers across to vaccine hesitancy as well. Next question on our list is from Bruce. I know we kind of touched on this one slightly, Gary, but do you see the COVID vaccine demand as an opportunity for better or broader vaccine acceptance, or as a risk if performance perceptions are not met, for example?
Yeah, definitely it's a risk. I suppose 6 months ago, before we knew anything about effectiveness or efficacy of the vaccines, people were quite concerned that they would be not so effective and that confidence would fall. So far, I suppose they look better than we thought. On the plus side, so now suddenly countries have to go and reach out to adults that they'd never reached out to before. And so in some cases, people are interacting with services for the first time, having a vaccine in their pharmacy or their GP clinic, and maybe when flu vaccine comes around or other pneumococcal vaccines, hopefully some of those connections will be preserved. And if they have a good experience with COVID vaccines, hopefully they will be more positively disposed to pneumococcal or flu.
Yeah. One thing I agree with all that. One thing we're quite concerned about, I suppose, is what happens when we see a safety event. So if there's an adverse event, especially a serious adverse event associated with COVID vaccines, kind of anywhere in the world, what does that do both to demand for the COVID vaccines and to confidence in the system, but also is there a knock-on effect in confidence in other vaccines? And so I think we've been pretty fortunate so far in the whole process that things it has not seemed to bleed across into routine vaccination beliefs and hesitancy, but anything can happen. So the response of governments to any sort of safety event is really, really important.
Great, thank you very much. So another question we had from Lulu was, do you think mothers or ordinary citizens expressing their vaccine confidence on traditional, so not just social media or in public, will be able to convince others to be vaccinated, not just VIPs or celebrities?
I think so. I mean, I
Yes.
don't know. Yes, yeah, it must be a yes. Seeing someone that you relate to has to help. And even you're hearing older people on the radio now, a lot of them took some heart from seeing other older people getting their COVID vaccines. Yeah, I think it has to help.
Absolutely. And seeing, a huge amount of the positive, effective communication comes from, Gary mentioned it as well, from a trusted spokesperson. And it doesn't have to be a spokesperson. It just has to be someone that you relate to, someone that you see yourself in. It's really important in the communication that we make sure that we have diverse people talking about vaccination. So making sure that we're not, filling our campaigns with all just sort of white people or all professors or all, it's a really important element of it to be relatable. And so I absolutely think, mothers, other ordinary citizens talking to the people they relate to most have probably more impact than celebrities.
Yeah, that's good to know. Cool, thank you very much. The next question I have is from Chris. And he says, are calls for compulsory vaccination for specific groups such as teachers a good idea, or do you think they're counterproductive?
Do you want to go first,
Yes.
Gary? Do you want me to? I have some. I'm not a huge fan of compulsory vaccination. I'm really not a fan of sort of vaccine mandates that come with penalties, particularly like the ones in Australia that we have around, you know, childcare benefits and things being cut for parents who don't vaccinate their kids. I don't think it's the best way to build confidence and to also create behavior change. So that said, I think that there are definitely going to be some professions where the COVID vaccine is, you know, important for that profession and for people in that role. I just think there has to be a really clear guidelines around who can safely get it, what happens if you don't get it, and I would love to make sure that there aren't sort of unnecessary penalties for people if they're not able to get it for a valid reason, because it's a very new vaccine. So I don't think that we should be running around forcing people to have it.
Yeah, I totally
that might be controversial.
No, not to me. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it is a bit of a controversial topic, but it's also a fascinating one. So thank you. Just a couple more questions before we close. We've had one. He says it's kind of a question, kind of a comment, but it'd be interesting to get your thoughts from Hajime. So what do you think about vaccine hesitancy in Japan? The vaccine coverage of the national immunization program is very high in Japan, except for around the HPV vaccine. The HPV vaccine issue is mainly based on the attitude of the health ministry. They announced the HPV vaccine is free because it is part of the national program, but we don't positively recommend you to take it. He says the government should not act in such a negative role. I'd like to know what both of you think.
I can give you a personal opinion. I don't know if it's a Vaccines Today opinion. I honestly think, I just think in a generation from now, it's going to be tragic in Japan. You know, a rich country that had a HPV vaccine program will begin to see, or continue to see, people getting cervical cancers and other cancers that will have crashed. The numbers will be way down in all peer countries. And honestly, I think they, I don't know, don't be too harsh about it. I think the questioner probably feels the same way. But just to give a counterexample, Denmark had almost an identical problem, and this spread then to Ireland, where I am, and we saw a big dip. But in Ireland, about 40 NGOs and other groups, really broad, teachers, parents, doctors, came together and made an alliance for the HPV vaccine and slowly rebuilt confidence. And it was really hard work, and they got great spokespersons and everything. And eventually most of the damage has been undone. And I can't believe that's still happening in Japan. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you pretty much everything that you said. I think it's such an example of what I was saying about the response to a potential safety event, or even an event that looks like it might be related to a vaccine. The way a government responds to that has enormous repercussions, and I think that's an example of you know, the government response was very you know, stepped very far back from the vaccine and has left it unsupported, really. So I think the government's influence is very substantial in this case, and I hope that there's some changes maybe after, as Gary said, after this sort of generation, after you sort of see the stark impacts. Hopefully the vaccine program will come back in more.
Yeah, it's a shame that you might have to wait for that, but yeah, it's a scary one. Cool, thank you very much. And we have a question from Isaac, which is, how can we counter misinformation using the tool of WhatsApp videos?
Gary?
That's a good one. Yeah. We don't do anything on WhatsApp. Do you mean things that come in on WhatsApp? Is that the question? Yeah, I guess it is. I don't know. We haven't done it, but I've seen some stuff that the UK is doing, particularly on minority communities, where they're putting videos onto WhatsApp in different languages and addressing specific concerns. People saying the vaccine is not vegetarian or contains meat or whatever. So I must say we don't really have any experience of it, but it can be done. The problem with WhatsApp is that it's closed in terms of monitoring it, whereas Facebook and Twitter, there are tools where you can pick out themes that are emerging, but WhatsApp and a few others are very difficult to track.
Cool.
I don't have anything more to add on WhatsApp. I mean, straight to me.
Lovely, thank you. And I have one last very quick question before we wrap up. What do you think? This is something that I was having a discussion with the other day with someone. What do you think about if you get a comment come in and you're not sure about it, you don't really want to actively address it? What do you think about hiding the comment so the person that's posted it can still see that they've done it and their friends and family, but other people can't see it? What do you think on that one?
I will display my ignorance to say that I didn't know you could do that. So I think generally speaking, with moderation, it's helpful to have a policy or to have some, I don't know what, Gary, if you agree with this, sort of to have some sort of transparency up front about what you do with comments, and that these are the things that might happen. We may hide occasional comments. We may occasionally block or delete comments if we feel that blah, blah, blah. I don't think there's any obvious harm in hiding it if it's not something that you're doing all the time or to avoid any sort of debate or discussion. But what do you think, Gary?
Yeah, my screen froze there just as got to the end of the question, but I think I got the gist of it. Yeah, so we do exactly this. We have a moderation policy saying we'll publish your comments, but if you break these rules, we'll remove it. Generally, we try and put as much out as possible so people who come think, all right, this has a diverse selection of views, but the ones you can quickly enough tell if they're really out there and they're just, it's pure misinformation. But if people have questions or they say, well, I heard this thing, I heard that vaccine shouldn't be given too quickly after the other vaccine or whatever, we put those up. I think that they're not too bad. So yeah, but we do hide comments. That's a fact. As long, I think transparency about it in the sense that you have a policy is key.
Great, that's really interesting. Yeah, Jess, I had never didn't know you could do that either, and was like, oh, okay, well that's I'll bear that one in mind. So thank you. That's both of you. That's really interesting. So thank you very much. That is all we've got time for today.
Thank you.